It happened. Not just thought, not just thread, the needle pierced. But still, she breathes. She walked all day through aching light, a silence heavier than night. Her message missed, a door unopened, a final straw that went unspoken. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she followed through the practice dream. The hour came, the sight was near, the world fell silent, sharp and clear. She sat, breath slow, the wind forgot to blow. The world kept turning, but she let go. This is tip, where pain became act, where the weight of silence tipped to fact, where the thread went taut then snapped the seam. Not fantasy now, but the real, the scene. Deep, the tension just before I, the impulse at the core. Peep, the postscript still unfolding. This is the moment, cold and holding, and you're meeting her here. You're not too late, you're just inside the storm she faced. She did what she had never done, let the plan become the one. No drama, no defiance flare, just the absence of being spared. Then white walls, I've drips, a nurse's voice, a trembling lip, the ache of breath she didn't want, the haunting echo of the want. Asked not in fear but in care, what did the thread pull from there? What broke that day? What went unseen? What hurt enough to pierce the seam? She may not know or say or trust, but your steadiness is a must. Hold the weight, not with your words, but with your presence calmly heard. This is tip, not just the fall, but the silence that surrounds it all. Not just the act, but what came before, the weeks, the thoughts, the closing door. T, the tension held inside, I, the impulse she couldn't hide. P, the part of her still here, breathing now, not disappeared. She's still here, so are you. The cloth is pierced, but not through. Begin again, not with force, but with care.
Welcome back to the Protect Podcast. You're listening to Season 4, Episode 5, The Point Breaks Through. This is the tip phase, the moment of action. Here, we walk slowly through the tapestry of suicide risk and recovery, thread by thread, moment by moment, to understand how pain weaves its way through a life and how connection can begin to restitch meaning into the cloth. If you have journeyed with us from the beginning, thank you for staying close. And if you're joining for the first time, I'm grateful you have found your way here. In this episode, we arrive at a turning point, a sharp point, the moment where intention moves into action. This is the phase we call tip. The tip phase marks the rupture. It is not a metaphor anymore, it is the act, the moment when pain tips into behavior, when the internal battle breaks the surface. And what happens next, whether the person survives or not, changes everything. This is not an easy place to visit, but it is necessary, because if we are to truly accompany people through the full spectrum of suicidal distress, we must be willing to sit at the sharp edge too, where the tip of the needle ruptures through the fabric of life. We stay present with reverence, with clarity, and with care. In episode 4, we stepped into the needle phase, a place of tightening threads where suicidal ideation shifts into intention. It's a quiet phase, but it is anything but passive. Here, the thread is no longer drifting, it's pulling toward a point. Needle gives us 6 ways to trace the movement. We begin with navigating ambivalence, that inner tug of war between wanting to live and wanting the pain to end, both sides pulling, the person caught in between, sometimes still holding on to reasons to stay, sometimes almost ready to let them go. Then came excluding options, when other ways of coping begin to fall away until suicide starts to feel like the only door left open. Hope narrows, possibilities close, and what was once a choice becomes a conviction. Examining means followed, moving from vague thoughts to specifics. The how, the where, the when. It might be quiet online searches, a visit to a certain place, or a mental rehearsal of what could happen. Next was drafting an exit. Early preparations that may seem small to others but are deeply significant. Canceling plans, putting affairs in order, avoiding future commitments, the subtle shaping of an end. Then leaving subtle signs, the quiet goodbyes, giving things away, withdrawing from relationships, messages or posts that carry more weight than they seem, and finally exploring the exit. These moments when the person comes close to acting. They may rehearse, they may even begin, but for whatever reason, fear, interruption, a flicker of connection, they step back. For Ari, we saw each of these threads. She navigated the conflict between staying and leaving. She began to close off other options. She researched and pictured her means. She quietly prepared, left signs, and even stood at the edge once before turning away. Needle taught us that this is not a loud phase. It is deliberate, it is organized, and it is urgent. Because once intention is formed, the distance to action can shrink suddenly. And that brings us to where we are now. Sometimes the thread slips through. The tension is too much, the silence too long, and the point breaks through the cloth. That is tip. In the steps model, tip is the fourth phase, the moment when thought becomes action, the point where the threaded needle pierces through. It is rupture. And once it happens, everything changes for the person and for those around them. Now, before we explore the 3 strands of tip, there's something important to understand about the pathway to this moment. We have been walking step by step from thread into needle, assuming there's a narrowing, a progression from ideation to intention to action. And for many people, that's how it unfolds, but not for everyone. The National Comorbidity Study found that 1 in 4 people who attempt suicide never pass through the intention stage at all. They jump straight from ideation, the thread we spoke about in episode 3, directly to action, the tip of the needle. No warning plans, no careful preparations, no visible signs of intention. For 3 in 4, the absence of plan is protective. For that 1 in 4, it isn't. And it is almost impossible to figure out who is that 1 in 4. And in that group, there are often factors like high impulsivity, heavy alcohol use, or acute stresses that collapse the gap between thought and act. A fight, a rejection, a wave of shame, an intoxicated night, and a piercing or a rupture occurs. But these factors overlap between the 3 in 4 and the 1 in 4. That's why no plans is never enough. It's not a substitute for safety planning. We cannot assume that the absence of intention means the absence of risk. The gap between ideation and action can be hours, minutes, and sometimes seconds. So in TIP, our job is to understand this crossing point. The acronym gives us 3 strands to follow. The first, T, tension builds. So when we begin to talk with someone about the lead up to their attempt, we need to set the tone early. I might start with something like, I want to understand what happened before you acted. Not to judge you, but see what the path looked like from your point of view. Sometimes those moments are a blur, sometimes they are crystal clear, and both are okay. We are looking at the hours, days, or moments that pull the thread so tight it finally broke. Was there a single sharp trigger, an argument, a rejection, a sudden loss, or was it a cluster of smaller things building over time? So I'll often say people describe the final day in different ways. Some wake up already knowing it will be the day. Others find the decision takes shape as the day unfolds. What was it like for you? Here's where I normalize the role of, say, alcohol or substances without judgment. For some, alcohol or drugs are part of the day, sometimes to numb things, sometimes without even thinking about how it might affect decisions, sometimes it's liquid courage. Was that part of your day? And we also want to understand whether they acted in isolation or with a part of them still hoping to be found. So you might say something like, when you think back, did you choose a place or time so no one would find you? Or was there any part of you, even the smallest part, that thought someone might still step in? This part of the conversation is also where the behavioral incident technique comes in. It's a way of walking through the sequence step by step. Would it be okay if we went through that day in as much detail as you can remember? From, say, when you woke up to the moment you acted. And then if people skip things, you might add in something like, hey, it seems like we have skipped over something. Can I pause you and ask you to go back so we don't miss any part of the picture? So you can use words like pause, rewind, playback, fast forward to help them tell their narrative, their story in as much detail as possible. That step by step process is vital because it helps us identify exits, moments where if a similar situation happens again, there might be a point to intervene or change the course. So that is the first strand, tension builds. Then the next strand is impact unfolds, which is the letter I in TIP. When we move into the moment of the act, we tread even more gently. This is where shame can be highest and where details are sometimes hard to share. So I might say, if you feel able, can we talk about the moment itself? Not to dwell on it, but because it helps me understand what it was like for you inside that moment. We are listening for whether it was impulsive, rehearsed, interrupted, and what the person's mindset was. So instead of asking, what method did you use, which sounds very cold, I might soften it. What did you find yourself reaching for in that moment? Why that? Do you think rather than maybe something else? If there was hesitation, that matters. So you can ask something like, was there any point where you paused, even briefly, before going ahead? Sometimes I will explore whether the act was shaped to prevent discovery or allow for it. Well, actually, it's not sometimes. I'll explore that every time because it's a really important piece of the jigsaw. So you might say, did you want to make sure no one found you? Or was there a part of you that thought someone might? Again, behavioral incident sequencing works here. In Protect, we talk about the before now technique, in which we work our way through the kind of day one, the 2 weeks in the lead up, and the 3 months. So that day one piece is where you can use behavioral incident. So you can, again, can we talk through what happened once you decided to act step by step? And if we jump over anything, I might ask you to go back just so I can see the whole picture with you. Those pauses in the story, the moments they skip over, often tell us where there was ambivalence, hesitation, or an opportunity for intervention. So that is the impact, which is the second strand. And then the third strand in TIP, the P, which stands for postscript. The postscript remains. Finally, we reach this kind of immediate aftermath. What happened once the act was interrupted, reversed, or completed to the point of survival? So I'll start by framing it with care. You've been through a lot to be here now. Can we talk a little about what happened afterwards in those first hours, or you can even say in those first minutes? There's no right or wrong answer here, and you can share as much or as little as feels okay. We want to know if they sought help or if help arrived unexpectedly. Did you reach out to anyone after, or did someone else step in? We are also gently exploring how they feel about being alive now. Some people feel relieved to have survived, others wish they hadn't, and some feel both at once. How has it been for you since that moment? So, a very gentle, am I type question. And we're looking for shifts, small or large. Has anything changed in how you see what happened or how you see yourself since that moment? These reflections are not just about understanding the past, they are essential for building safety in the future, knowing how the attempt ended and how they make sense of it now tells us where the threads might be strongest and where they are most fragile. By moving through tension, impact, and postscript in this way, step by step, sensitive, shame aware, and with careful sequencing, we are not just gathering a history, we are mapping the possible exits for the next time life's weave strains this hard. Now, in reality, it's rare to be talking to someone in the exact moment of an attempt. Most tip phase conversations happen in the hours or first day afterwards, often in an emergency department bed, a resus bay, or an ICU cubicle, or on the toxicology ward. Sometimes with paramedics, sometimes with a crisis team member, sometimes at 3 a.m. with a psych reg. The post action phase, which we will explore in MEND in the next episode of the Protect podcast, comes later, days on, once there has been 1, 2, 3 sleep cycles and the first shock has settled. Here in TIP, we are in the immediacy. The body may still be recovering, the emotions may still be raw, tangled, or entirely numb, and that means our approach matters. Trauma informed care tells us to start with safety, both emotional and physical. We make it clear we are here to understand, not to judge. Motivational interviewing keeps us curious and collaborative. Can you walk me through what happened? What was going through your mind as the day unfolded? If you had to describe what made it feel like you couldn't wait any longer, what would you say? So, open ended questions. Solution focused strategies let us gently plant seeds for the future. What, if anything, helped you pause or slow down that day? If something like this happened again, what would you want to be different in that moment? Who or what could make it even a little harder for you to reach the same point again? And always, we validate the pain without endorsing the act. Okay? We validate the pain without endorsing the act. It makes sense that you wanted the pain to stop. It's clear how much you were carrying. Okay? So, techniques of shame attenuation. But remember, we are validating the pain, not endorsing the act. We reframe the attempt as an act driven by unbearable distress, an escape from suffering, not from life itself. But there's something else we must address in these first conversations: safety reassurances, particularly if they are blanket safety reassurances. It's not uncommon for someone to tell us, I'll never do it again. And for that to bring us relief, we want to believe them. And sometimes that reassurance is genuine. But we also know risk is dynamic, it can change very quickly. So if someone says they won't act again, we need to explore why they feel that way. What's changed since then is a good place to start. And we need to go beyond because I survived. If they express regret or remorse, we ask where that comes from. They might say, I've had a good night's sleep and I've had time to think, but dig deep. Is it because they frightened someone they love? Because the method was painful? Because survival feels humiliating? If nothing in their life circumstances has shifted, we need to understand what's really driving the reassurance. Sometimes it's brought things out in the open and the family know about it and the support is there. That's fine. Capture that and help the person also understand where that reassurance might be coming from. It is also important to understand that Equally, some people feel no regret or regret that they have survived. Some even say, I wish it had worked. Others feel ashamed. They couldn't even kill themselves, trapped in the same emotional pain, now with the belief they have failed at this too. These are not easy admissions, but they matter deeply for risk assessment and safety planning. We might say um, some people feel relieved to have survived, others feel disappointed or even ashamed. Some feel both at once. How is it for you right now? Or you might frame it slightly simpler. You might say, you have said you wouldn't do it again. Can you help me understand what's different now from before? Or even simpler, when you think about surviving, what does that bring up for you? Well, actually, that might bring out a much more complex response and might be slightly more difficult for the person to answer. But you might frame it differently, but please do explore these safety reassurances. For those living with chronic suicidality, especially in the context of borderline personality disorder, these questions can be confronting. They may have felt this way for years. They may act again. Here, the aim is not to win an argument about living or dying. Power struggles will only entrench positions. Instead, we stay alongside them. You might say, it sounds like these thoughts have been with you a long time. That must be exhausting. We look for moments, however small, when hope flickers. What was the last thing, no matter how small, that made life even slightly more bearable? We try to capture those fragments of connection, of meaning, of care, and hold them up without forcing a decision about the future. In TIP, we are not just documenting risks, we are bearing witness to rupture. We are listening for the strain that built, the shape of the act, the echoes that remain, and the signals of what might still hold. We are holding a thread and a needle, the tip of which has already pierced the cloth, and asking, gently, clearly, whether there is any way we can be stitched back in. Let's come back to Ari. The first time, she turned back. The second time, she didn't. And here's what's important. There was no slow build through the needle this time. No careful planning, no gathering of means over days, no subtle signs that might have given someone a chance to intervene. Ari was one of that 1 in 4. She jumped straight from ideation, from thinking about dying, into action on that day. It wasn't dramatic. There were no public posts, no note. Just a convergence of moments that tipped the balance. A message left unanswered. A day too heavy. A silence that landed hard. That morning, she woke feeling flat, telling herself she was just tired. By the afternoon, the tiredness had shifted into a restless, dangerous clarity, thinking in shapes and steps. By evening, those steps had lined up into something she could follow. There was alcohol in the system, enough to lower the barriers that had held her back before. She reached for the pills, no hesitation, no call for help. She didn't avoid being found, but she didn't make it likely either. In her mind, this wasn't about sending a message, it was about ending the noise. That was the tension, not just a bad day, but the months and years behind it, family fractures, shame that clung to her skin, the grief that never quite lifted, the wear of illness, and the quiet, persistent belief that she was already fading from view. All of it pulled tighter until the thread passed through the eye of the needle. The impact was brief in time, but heavy in weight. In that moment, everything inside her aligned with the act. It felt like a point of no return. There was no bargaining, no testing, only the sense that the pain and the action had finally matched. And for a few hours that seemed final. But someone noticed, a friend who hadn't heard back, a knock on the door, a call unanswered, then an ambulance and an ICU bed, and now Ari was breathing again. The postscript was complicated. These were questions she had never rehearsed. Was she relieved? Ashamed? Still certain she wanted to die? Would anyone believe the depths of pain that had lived behind her silence? She didn't have the answers. She only knew the cloth hadn't fully torn. Somehow a thread had caught, maybe in the shape of the knock at the door, maybe in the quiet moments after the overdose when she had realized she was still here. And maybe for now, that was enough to hold. This is the reality of the tip phase. It is raw, it is sudden, and it is sacred ground. Not because the act was right or wrong, but because it reveals the truth about what it took for a person to reach that point. How long they may have been holding on in silence, how much strain they have been carrying in the weave of their life, and how easily we might miss the signs if we don't look beneath the surface. In tip, we meet the moment of rupture. Sometimes it's deliberate and rehearsed. Sometimes, as we have seen, it's impulsive, a leap straight from ideation into action. 1 in 4 people take that path, bypassing the intention stage altogether. Remember that. Which means the absence of a plan is never enough to reassure us. No plans can be protective for many, but for some, the gap between thought and act is measured in minutes, not months. As professionals, as supporters, as fellow human beings, we must learn to be fluent in rupture. That means we prepare not only to prevent an attempt, but to respond when it has already happened. To walk into those first fragile hours with compassion, clarity, and courage. Tip gives us 3 strands to follow. Tension, the build-up that brought the thread to breaking point. Impact, the act itself in all its complexity. Postscript, what remains when the cloth has been pierced and the person is still here, in whatever state survival has left them. When we trace these strands with care, we begin to see not just what happened, but what still might be possible. Because the story does not end at the point of rupture. Not if the person is still breathing, not if we are still listening. And that's where we go next. In the next episode, we enter mend, a phase where survival becomes a starting point for something new, the post-action phase, where we begin the slow, deliberate work of meaning making, of holding what happened and finding ways to reweave the cloth where it has torn.
She walked all day through aching light, the silence heavier than night. A message missed, a door unopened, a final straw that went unspoken. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she followed through the practiced dream. The hour came, the sight was near, the world fell silent, sharp and clear. She sat, breath slow, the wind forgot to blow, the world kept turning, but she let go. This is tip, where pain became act, where the weight of silence tipped to fact, where the thread went taut and snapped the seam. Not fantasy now, but the real, the scene. T, the tension just before I, the impulse at the core, the postscript still unfolding. This is the moment, cold and holding. And if you're meeting her here, you're not too late. You're just inside the storm she faced. She did what she had never done, let the plan become the one. No drama, no defiance flared, just the apse of being spared. Then white walls, I've drips, a nurse's voice, a trembling lip, the ache of breath she didn't want, the haunting echo of the want. Asked not in fear, but in care, what did did the thread pull from there? What broke that day? What went unseen? What hurt enough to pierce the seam? She may not know or say or trust, but your steadiness is a must. Hold the weight, not with your words, but with your presence calmly heard. This is tip, not just the fall, but the silence that surrounds it all. Not just the act, but what came before. The weeks, the thoughts, the closing door. Deep, the tension held inside, i.e. the impulse she couldn't hide. The part of her still here, breathing now, not disappear. She's still here, so are you. The cloth is pierced, but not through.